Most Americans believe retirement fails because they didn't save enough, didn't invest early enough, or made a few bad decisions along the way. That story is comforting because it keeps the blame personal. It says the system is fine, and if something goes wrong, it must be your fault. But that story is wrong. Retirement in the United States is not quietly breaking because of individual mistakes. It is breaking because the system was designed for a version of life that no longer exists, and it has not been rebuilt to match reality. This is not a video about market crashes, bad stock picks, or financial panic. This is about structure, about timing, about assumptions that were once reasonable and are now dangerous, about a retirement system that still behaves as if careers are stable, healthcare is predictable, inflation is temporary, and time itself is cooperative. None of those assumptions hold anymore, and yet the rules remain unchanged. In this video, I will show you why the American retirement system increasingly fails people who do everything right. Why working longer does not automatically make you safer. Why saving more does not always reduce risk. And why the most common retirement advice sounds logical but quietly ignores how the system actually behaves once you reach your 60s and 70s. This is an educational and analytical examination of structure and incentives, not personal financial advice. The goal is understanding, not instruction. To understand what is happening now, we need to step back and look at what the system was originally built to do. Social Security was never designed to fully replace income. It was designed as a floor, not a plan. Employer pensions assumed long-term loyalty to a single company. 401(k)s assumed steady wages, continuous employment, and decades of uninterrupted contributions. Healthcare planning assumed that medical costs would grow slowly and predictably. Longevity assumptions were based on shorter retirements, not 25 or 30-year spans. All of those components made sense in isolation. Together, they formed a system that worked tolerably well for a specific generation, under specific conditions. That success created an illusion of permanence. The rules felt stable, so people stopped questioning them. The system did not collapse. It simply froze in time while everything around it changed. Today, careers are fragmented. Income is volatile. Healthcare costs behave nonlinearly. Housing consumes a larger share of lifetime earnings. Longevity risk has quietly become one of the largest financial risks most people will ever face, and yet it is barely discussed in concrete terms. The retirement system still assumes smooth lines and predictable curves, while real life now moves in shocks, gaps, and asymmetries. The most dangerous part is that none of this feels dramatic. There is no single moment where retirement suddenly fails. There is no obvious alarm. Instead, pressure accumulates slowly. A few years of higher inflation permanently change withdrawal math. A late career job loss reduces peak earning years. A medical event reshapes expenses for decades, not months. Each factor alone seems manageable. Combined, they quietly shift the entire outcome. What makes this especially deceptive is that the system continues to reward compliance. You are told to contribute, delay gratification, trust long-term averages, and stay the course. Those instructions are not malicious. They are incomplete. They were written for a world where time, work, and risk behaved differently. Following them blindly today can create a false sense of security that only reveals itself when flexibility is gone. This video is about seeing the system clearly before that point. Not to predict disaster, and not to sell fear, but to understand why so many Americans reach retirement age confused by outcomes they never expected. Outcomes that do not match decades of effort. Outcomes that feel personal, even though they are systemic. In the next sections, we will break down how each major pillar of the U.S. retirement framework behaves under modern conditions. We will examine why working longer is no longer a universal solution, why longevity amplifies small errors into permanent problems, and why average returns become a misleading concept once withdrawals begin. We will also look at the psychological traps built into retirement planning language itself, and how they shape decisions long before retirement actually starts. By the end of this video, the goal is not to give you a checklist or a formula. The goal is to give you clarity, to replace comforting narratives with accurate ones, to understand the system not as it is described, but as it operates. If retirement failure were caused by obvious mistakes, the outcomes would be obvious too. They are not. What actually breaks most retirement plans is not one large error, but the interaction between time, withdrawals, and constraints that only appear after work income stops. The system assumes flexibility exactly when flexibility disappears. The moment paychecks end, the math changes direction. Accumulation rewards patience and averages. Decumulation punishes sequence, timing, and volatility. A strong market early in retirement can stabilize an entire plan. A weak one can permanently compress options. This is not about panic selling or poor discipline. It is about order. The same average return produces radically different outcomes depending on when it arrives. The retirement system rarely explains this clearly, yet it quietly builds everything on that assumption. Longevity magnifies this effect. Longer lives do not simply require more savings. They require stability over longer exposure. Small misalignments compound into permanent conditions. A slightly higher withdrawal rate in the first decade does not just reduce a balance. It reshapes the entire probability curve. A modest increase in healthcare costs does not create a one-time hit. It creates a recurring drag that grows as flexibility shrinks. Time stops being an ally and becomes an amplifier. Working longer is often presented as a universal solution. In theory, it delays withdrawals and increases contributions. In reality, it assumes health, employability, and wage stability at precisely the ages when those are least guaranteed. Late career income is fragile. Job loss near retirement age is harder to recover from, not easier. When work extends out of necessity rather than choice, the system shifts risk back onto the individual while pretending it is providing relief. Inflation operates quietly but permanently. A single elevated period does not need to persist for decades to matter. It only needs to reset the baseline. Expenses rarely return to their previous level, especially healthcare, housing, and insurance. Retirement planning language treats inflation as a smooth, average force. Real life delivers it in steps. Each step locks in a higher cost structure that withdrawals must now support indefinitely. Perhaps the most overlooked element is psychological. Retirement planning encourages certainty. Target numbers, projected balances, and age-based milestones create the impression that outcomes are controllable if the rules are followed. This framing delays adaptation. People do not question assumptions while things appear on track. By the time reality diverges, the timeline for meaningful adjustment has shortened or disappeared. This is why retirement failure feels personal even when it is systemic. The system does not collapse. It produces outcomes that are technically logical but emotionally disorienting. People look back and search for a mistake because the alternative is harder to accept, that the structure itself no longer aligns with modern life. Understanding this is not about abandoning planning or rejecting discipline. It is about recognizing limits. Retirement systems built on averages struggle in a world defined by variability. Systems designed for stable careers struggle in fragmented labor markets. Systems that assume predictable expenses struggle in environments where costs behave asymmetrically. The purpose of this video is not to replace one checklist with another. It is to remove the illusion that retirement outcomes are purely the result of personal virtue or failure. Once that illusion fades, the conversation changes. Planning becomes less about hitting a number and more about managing exposure. Less about certainty and more about resilience. Retirement in America does not fail because people stop caring. It fails because the system asks for trust long after its assumptions have expired. Seeing that clearly is not pessimism. It is orientation. And without orientation, even the most disciplined effort can quietly drift off course. This analysis is provided for educational purposes only. It is not personalized financial advice. Its value lies in clarity, not prescription, because the most dangerous retirement risk is not volatility, inflation, or longevity by themselves. It is misunderstanding